Hey everyone, welcome to the Brick+Work Podcast. I just wanted to kind of recap. We started this especially now to give an opportunity for people in commercial real estate and development in and around Los Angeles to focus on some of the pressing issues here. We will feature professionals from different disciplines that will provide, their unique perspective, and hopefully you could come away and learn something from it. So, welcome, Daniel.
Hi, John.
So, let's start from the beginning. I think we do this with all our guests, and just wanted to get your origin story. I know you're from Michigan, but attended high school in Nevada and went to Cornell in New York before coming to LA. So share with us.
Sure. Let me give you the whirlwind of that journey. I did grow up in Michigan, one of 7 children, and my parents divorced when I was 12 years old. My dad moved to Canada and my mother moved to Nevada. So as a teenager, I bounced back and forth between them, and I ended up graduated high school in Reno, Nevada, and went to upstate New York to go to college, good architecture school I could find, and somehow I got into it. I always say it was because I was geographically desirable for their demographic, but who knows? And so I did that, and a funny part of that is that after my first year there, I came back, had a little bit of a personal crisis in that summer, and stopped. I dropped out of school for 3 years. And in that period of time, I got involved with this kind of funky off-grid religious group, and we moved lock, stock, and barrel to Santa Barbara, California in about 1982.
Yeah.
And I was there for a year or 2 more, and then I went back, reapplied. They made me reapply to school, but I went back and I finished it. So in that time that I worked here, I went to work for an architect, and I'm not kidding, my official position was office boy. My name was office boy. So that was pretty funny. So when I graduated from Cornell, I just walked right back into that firm and started working there. After a couple of years, I got married, and then I felt the call to go into full-time ministry. So I moved to Orange County to go to seminary.
Oh, wow.
And I did that for a couple of years, got my license while I was a seminarian, and then got too busy to really make all those pieces work and stopped out of that. So let me take a little break from this and see if I can be an architect for a while. And that was about 26 years ago. So here I am, still doing architecture and still in Orange County, which is where I moved to right off the bat when I came down here. So that's kind of a roundabout, but that is how I got here.
Wow. Okay. So I guess, I know that you also taught at USC. So, funny enough, our company has a lot of alumni from USC, right?
I don't doubt it.
That's not a surprise if you're from here, if you're aware that they have a great real estate development school and just everything real estate from there. So, and urban planning as well.
Yes.
So a lot of people from, my partner Alex's firm are from there as well. Proud Trojans. So, but I know you taught at the MRED, the
and
Masters.
Still do, by the way.
Yeah, and still do. So, tell us more about that. That's super interesting.
Sure.
I think a lot of people, maybe our audience, might just be getting into real estate development as well. So, if you want to share something from your experiences in teaching.
Oh, sure. Well, it's a context in which I'm really comfortable. I got that preacher gene, so I like lecturing. I like working with the students. It's been remarkable to be there, and it's really funny how I ended up doing that. I was originally asked to substitute for one of my colleagues who was supposed to lecture and couldn't. Got called out of town or some crazy thing. And so naturally, my first lecture ever in the grad school at USC, I just put everything I had into it and came and did this blistering presentation about whatever I was working on. And the guy said, you want to come back? And so I kept coming back over a period of time and just kind of got ingrained as a kind of, I fly in and fly out, right? I do like 3 lectures a semester typically, and do a little bit more studio time. It's been more some years, less some years. Now, after some time, the fellow who runs the class has been trying to step away from it a little bit. So he's pressing me really hard to take over the whole class. And I'm thinking I'm at that juncture in my life when I might actually do that. And so I'm contemplating that. So I'm committed to that program. It's great to keep myself fresh when I have to deal with a room of people with a median age is 27, right?
Yeah.
They keep it lively. And I've learned sometimes as much from them and from my colleagues who also teach in the program as I've brought to it. So it's a really, really rewarding atmosphere to be in. And there's a fringe benefit is that very many of my students go on to work for my clients.
Ah, there you go. And
it was never my intention when I started doing it, and it just has worked out that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, tagging on that too with design and just, let's talk more about like development. Look, there's always that kind of issue where, a developer has to make sure that a project pencils, right? And so they're looking at it from a very numbers perspective. And then, the interesting thing for me even about development is that kind of juncture where, obviously there's a financial component, which is huge, right? In that.
Yes.
But even though that might be the driver, you're still having to deal with issues of it's where people are going to live, right? And people are going to work and commute, and it's a community and it's a city. So obviously now politics are also involved, right? And then design. So, because there's this whole, this is our neighborhoods, our community. So we don't want things to stand out, but we don't also want to be too stuck in one place, and we want to be open and innovate. So talk to us more about that. How do you kind of view those things, in your viewpoint?
Wow. Great question, John. There is a thing that has sort of emerged in working with budding developers in the MRED, and that there is a pragmatic bottom line to most development. If you're in for-profit, it's making a pencil, and if you're for not-for-profit, it's getting your capital stack to line up so that at least the thing functions. So there's many, many, many tents. Right? I used to say to people, because I have been in residential for a couple of decades, and I dearly love multifamily. And I used to say to people, it's one thing to think about how a building I'm doing that's going to shape the urban context for up to 75 years or longer, while simultaneously considering what it's like to put on makeup. And I say that because we think about the most intimate details of people's lives, and at the same time, my civic responsibility is, this is not a tent. This is not an RV. This thing's going to be there for a long time. It's going to disrupt the neighborhood for a few years initially, and then be there for a really long time, and hopefully become a cherished and well-loved element of the overall urban fabric. The best developers, John, it seems like to me, and I have to be really careful here, but they have something that is a wild-eyed visionary quality. And I'm seeing a lot of that recently, and especially as millennials, the most mature millennials, start to move into leadership roles. I see a lot of smaller developers who are willing to take a little bit more risk. And as I said, it's a very large playing field. So we need the big guys. We need the big guys with finance committees and standards of IRR and stuff like to take down the bigger projects, because little guys can't do that.
Right.
But with all of their prowess and their capital position and their reputation in the marketplace, they sometimes do not move with the nimble quality that somebody who's smaller with less things in tow does. And again, I want to be really cautious to say that there's room for both. And I like working with both, but there's something occasionally that's a bit alluring about the younger, smaller groups who will take more chances on things.
Absolutely agree. I think even in my perspective, I envision Brick+Work to be kind of a disruptor in a sense. I'm a big Elon Musk fanboy, so I do like people that like to change, and it's probably one of the hardest things to do, right? And you could even ask him how many nights, hours that he's invested in both companies, right? So I agree with you. I think just like bigger companies that are out right now versus the smaller, nimble tech companies that come and disrupt,
Mm-hmm.
there is a place for both, right? I think the stability of the bigger builders
Mm-hmm.
are that they are going to provide kind of an ability to get housing and commercial and, things in a neighborhood to provide that support, but they can't be the end all or the only option out there. So
sure. Well, another thing that you just I thought you were going to go there, but it's they can command the financing.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And the equity, and that's why they can do bigger stuff. And that's a critical, essential ingredient in the overall mix of what we try to do, for sure.
Yeah, I think also I've been thinking about this too, is I think there needs to be, just like venture capital, because, we're a commercial real estate startup ourselves. So very familiar with the landscape of capital raise and seed funds and all that good stuff. But if you think about it for development, just like we're kind of comparing all the players in development in financing, I think there also needs to be some funds out there that serve the purpose of funding innovative developers, if that makes sense. So in an LP stack, but with the mindset of a tech venture company, right? Where they're going, look, we need to understand what you're building, vision, concept, team, everything. We got to vet you guys. It's very difficult to raise. Let me just put it that way.
Yeah, without a doubt, right?
Yeah, but I think there is that missing piece to help more innovative developers get the capital they need to make it.
I think that's an amazing observation. I would dearly love to see something like that happen. And I follow the thread. I'm also involved in modular and offsite fabrication, which is something I'm really passionate about. Yeah. And, we keep sensing every year, well, this is the year, right? But right now, with what's going on, I have never felt so much momentum to move toward an offsite fabrication sort of model. And you want to see a disruptor? John, when you really sit down and consider the whole paradigm of how that will radically shift the supply chain delivery system for housing, especially attainable housing, it's like a lot of people who've been doing this for a long time can get really intimidated by that, because it's like, oh my gosh, right? I'm in the autumn of my career. Do I really have to downshift and learn a whole new process of doing something? Yeah. So there, and we meet that with equal parts thrilled expectation and dread. But I see it coming, and I agree with you. I mean, things that disrupt. We've been so accustomed to that for maybe the last decade, and that even the disruptor may not last, but they still change things. My favorite illustration of that is the ride-hailing services, right? One of the big deals was no cash ever was exchanged, and that was just a fabulous attribute of that system, right? Well, it wasn't long after that all the taxi cab companies adopted pay by credit, do all this kind of stuff. So they tried to duplicate that ease that the disruptor introduced. Same thing happens in development. The ideas flow both ways, right? The stability, how to organize the portfolio and the capital stack tends to flow from the top down, and the innovation, try something new, tends to percolate up. So as long as we keep that streak going both ways, it's a good deal.
Absolutely. And talking about that, let's just touch, with the elephant in the room. I mean, now it's become kind of a buzzword where people are avoiding to say it altogether. But look, we're under a global pandemic with COVID-19, and it is probably the biggest disruptor, right, for our society as a whole. I mean, look, I don't think anyone would have asked this to be the reason or the cause for a disruption, but it is what it is. And so I think there is some positive change that's happening because of this. But now, in your opinion, how does that change the landscape of, design and development in LA moving forward? Given
for whatever reason, I've been talking about this quite a lot in the last couple of weeks, and trying to find the elements. There's so many elements that we do right now. I went out to lunch today, and moved from my car to the restaurant wearing a mask, get in, sit down. Oh, I'm at the table. Great. So you can take it off. And then put it back on, as good citizen and all that on my way back out. And it's like, okay, so we've kind of gotten used to that. And it's like, it's not nightmare. It's just like a little inconvenient. But that's not going to last forever, right? If God willing, we don't have a second wave, which I'm praying we don't. Eventually that will stop. I mean, they tried to stop it once. Governor Newsom thought, well, maybe a little too soon. So it's back. It's the same thing with the trends that I'm seeing discussed in the press right now about, well, how's it going to change office space and how it's going to change different things like that. Office and retail, extraordinarily volatile in this time period. And I'm going, boy, those balls are swirling in the air and I had no idea where they're going to land. I don't even want to suggest. Some of the stuff we're talking about in multifamily is temporary. It's temporary. I promise you it's temporary. And I tried to identify a couple of things that I think maybe will stick. And the single biggest thing is work from home. And that actually changes design, which makes my heart beat, right? Because it's like, oh, okay, so you do not produce units any longer that almost wherever you are, that do not have some acknowledged accommodation for plugging in your laptop and working and doing a Zoom call like this one, right? And so that is going to stay. And I don't think that's going to go away, even though most people working from home are going to snap back to the office. That's my prediction. So even if 10%, John, if 10% of them who had to do it in the crisis stay at home, the numbers and the impact of the numbers of that are just phenomenal. And they mean a lot for planning and production of especially multifamily communities. And I'll tell you why, because I see it right now is the core is considered, there's a lot of debate about the core, whether density makes code worse, right? And I'm starting to see the other side of the argument come out and debunk that idea. So they've gone after transit's not so bad and density's not so bad, right? So it's like, okay, you're right. There's always going to be a certain population that is comfortable with that. But for right now, the bloom is off the rose in the urban core to a certain extent. So people are looking farther afield, and the fact that they can work from home has just gone into hyperspeed in terms of people. I just read an article, I had it on my other screen, about homeowners fleeing the urban core to the suburbs, right? It's like, somebody called Joel Kotkin because he's having the best day of his life right now.
Look, I share your views as well. I think there's an argument for and against anything that happens in this pandemic, and it's hard to have a stance because everything's so fluid, right? But I do agree that the nightmarish situations that people are talking about, where death of retail, given a vaccine and ability to kind of get everyone vaccinated, I think that'll change and people will go back and start shopping. But are there going to be improvements? Did it quicken adoption for grocery delivery, for remote work? I think it will, but I think that again is another net positive benefit.
No, I do too. It's another design impact, right? Because the proliferation of home deliveries of everything. A lot of communities right now are not really set up to facilitate that. That's not going backwards. It's going to snap back a little, but there's always going to be a decent, measurable, vestigial amount of that remaining, and we have to accommodate that, right? I remember a few years back we started putting in, I want to say, Uber waiting rooms, right? That's what we call them, the Uber lounge. It's a rideshare waiting area in urban properties, and it's like, okay, well, it takes more space. It kind of does this. Oh yeah, but it's cool, right? So that you sometimes in accommodating things, you try to make them flexible to a certain extent when you can, but that one's pretty tough because there's like curb cuts and driveways and things. So that's not also flexible. But that's going to be with us until the next disruptor of personal transportation, which all that's going to do is take drivers out of the cars.
Right.
The cars are still going to be there.
I'm sorry, I sometimes go off topic, but the next question then is going to get us kind of back is, so in design, what are the new things that are exciting that you're seeing coming up as a concept or as a way of delivering better design that works, because again, I apologize, I don't have a background in design, but from my outside point of view, I think that design should serve every purpose, right? Meaning that it should obviously align with the developer's costs and penciling. It should also be aesthetically pleasing for everyone in the community to enjoy, but even people that work and live and see the things that are being designed on a day-to-day basis also brings us joy, right? So I think it should serve all three. But what do you want to share as far as yeah, I know that's
I think I loosely define this as a flight to value. And that sounds really highfalutin abstract language, but as we search for, especially, John, attainable housing solutions, I mean, the number of people in Los Angeles County who are severely stressed in their housing budgets is shameful, really.
Yeah.
And so I'm, somebody who's in the middle of that industry, I'm going, what can we do? And one of the things we can do is, and this is where I get kind of controversial, so bear with me, I try not to offend too many people, is it's redefining our perception of what housing is. When you are expected to produce 500,000 housing units in 8 years, that's from the governor, it's like, how do you do that, right? And you want to hit this value point? And so we begin to take hints, speaking of disruption, from fabrication, right? And how do they make things? The example I always like is this. What if you thought about your dwelling as a widget instead of as a home? And that gets controversial. If you decide that you're going to buy a nice piece of property in the Palisades and design your own custom home, well, that's a bespoke piece, right? That you invest in, and there's a lot of meaning and all this, right? When we need 500,000 housing units in 8 years, if we don't start thinking of housing as a commodity, how many of these I can roll off the line as quickly as possible, we will never, ever get there. And people find it very controversial that I could dare to think about a dwelling as a product and not as a home. But I think I'm willing to introduce the idea and go a couple of rounds with you, because I'm thinking if we don't start thinking about it like that, it's not going to happen.
I agree. I actually, it's not controversial to me. I think we're on the same page there. The only thing that I kind of see as far as, because we're kind of more on the city side with the land use and the zoning side, and obviously LA being, the fire department having a say in a lot of projects, rightfully so, right? Because I think safety is a big concern. So I would throw out, I think concept is essential to meet the housing demand in the future, right? To think of housing as a widget. And it doesn't mean that it can't be designed, it can't be functional. It could be everything, I think, given what's happening with modular builds and builds that we can bring here. But now, how do we get over the hurdle of safety in the cities kind of then conforming? I think they're starting to allow a few all steel modular builds. I think there's one project that I read about that's the first in LA that's kind of pushing that forward to give a comfort level to the city that these can get done safely at scale. So is really that going to be the key piece here, is that we have to have real life examples of this getting done, benefiting the community, it's safe, and it's cost effective to be able to launch more, right?
It's interesting. I don't think I've heard a lot of argument against the safety of a modular product. The point that you made, though, that I think is a good takeaway, it's very few people, John, will do something if there's not one to copy. Right? And so I know the guys, it's UAH. I can't remember exactly what that stands for. It's I can give him a shout out. It's Drew Ornstein and a couple of guys who are doing that first one. I think it's modular in Hollywood. Then there's a smattering of other modular projects happening or storage container reuse types of projects. And I will just tell you, human nature is such that I want to be the second guy in or the third guy in. I am not a trailblazer. My investors can't take trailblazing. My wife can't take trailblazing. So somebody else does it and let them take the hard knocks, and then we can say, that's not so bad, really. And because that's what I think is a big part of it. From a life safety perspective, I completely agree with you. And we people want to be safe, and they want to sense that they're safe in addition to actually being safe. And I think that the requirements, for the most part, that the fire department comes up with, LA, well, there's the debate over whether to change that one fire district in the city, changed all the fire district 1 with which you can't do wood. So it's like, really?
Yeah.
So it's the Palmer fire, John. It was the Palmer fire that made that a big issue. So of all the things I have on my radar that shape it, that's not one of the highest ones up there. But the perceived doability of something is extremely important. Boy, I tell you what, we open one of those things in Hollywood, there are going to be people lined up to come and visit it. And they're going to go, yeah, sure, of course we can do this. And then they move on to their second one and their third one. And if you're doing an offsite fabrication process, you get really good by the third one.
Got it.
And then hopefully you lay out other properties. You've designed, forgive me, you've designed the product and it works. And even more important than that, people want it.
Right.
And that will open the floodgates. And then I go out and I have that 100-unit building or whatever it is. I don't change the units. I don't change it very much. I go boom, and then I build it somewhere else.
Right.
It was like a franchising of multifamily housing, right? It's like, when they rolled out a McDonald's or a In-N-Out or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in agreement. It's surprising to me that, like, let's just say I look at Singapore, right, and look at their housing department. Kind of, I understand that they might not be equally, or you can't compare them to here in the U.S., right, just based on kind of how they're structured with their government. But with that being aside, when I read about kind of how they're forward thinking and how they look at everything and just go with the best solution possible, right, without that kind of barrier of entry as far as no one wants to be the first to fail, right?
Yes.
Like they want to be the second and third successes. Again, with Tesla and like now GM rolling out and Ford rolling out with electric cars, it's like you always need that first to go out there. Totally.
Yeah. And there's, somebody goes out and falls on their sword is the first one. And then even sometimes happens. I mean, I don't think Tesla, that was the case, but for others, there certainly have been. Coda springs to mind, for example.
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, look, we're coming to the tail end of this. I think this conversation was awesome. The last thing, so our audience that is going to be mostly involved in some sort of aspect of real estate in Los Angeles, whether they're brokers or they're developers, architects, even property managers, appraisers, investors. So that's kind of our audience. So is there a final takeaway that you want to kind of give them that might be something that has been on your mind that you want to share?
Wow. One is very tempted to spout a cliche or platitude, John, as in we're all in this together. But I would say this.
You don't have to. No, that was it.
Here's what I want to say is there's a tremendous demand for attainable housing. There's, or just housing in general, right? We're responding to this global interruption of business as usual, right? And there's a lot of room in the development space. Do you know what? I saw a piece of data from, I think it was Myers Research. I'm going to give credit where credit's due. The other day that said the segment of multifamily that comes onto the marketplace for about 7-8 years, the kind of 50 and up unit communities have been the lion's share of the work. For the next 5 years, there's going to be an explosion in properties of the 0 to 49 unit range. Okay, a lot of the big guys won't touch 49 units, right? Because that whole machine, they've got the same machine, and to get it reduced to a small thing. So I think the window of opportunity for innovative, younger, smaller, doesn't have to be, to enter that marketplace and to learn how to do this with a fresh set of eyes, because everything has been shaken up a little bit, is really great. And to that end, I find that as I continue to plumb the depths of the TOC, right, and get used to what that actually means and what that does, it's a puzzle and working that out. But what it has done is, if you learn how to get through that, and by the way, your reports help with that, so that was my plug for you. You can say, suddenly lots of smallish properties I can do 60 units there, or even I can do 45 units there, and I don't have to build a bedroom for every car. It's like, man, I've seen these coming up on my LinkedIn feed, and I'm thinking, I want everybody and their sister to get in that space and develop those sub 50 unit places, because that's going to be a growing area, and there are not enough people in the development space to do it. So I think I would love to see people say, let me try development as a career and have a passion for housing and just go out and do it.
Wow. Yeah. And just to kind of touch on that too, that was really one of the main reasons why we started Brick+Work as well. Is I don't think there's any one right answer. And just like you said, what I've noticed coming into this industry is there's more barriers of entry than an ability to kind of get more people in. And that's the problem we wanted to solve right away, is just, okay, why aren't you coming in here? Why isn't this space interesting? You have, a set of tools or a new, fresh mindset that you could bring to this problem. But what was the reason why you can't? Well, what if we don't know what we can and can't build? What if we make a mistake? And that happens actually quite often, where we get developers that said, well, change of plans. I bought this property. I did not have access to a Brick+Work report or a land use attorney. I bought it thinking I could build this. Can't do it. So we're going to start renovating it and turn it into a rental, right? So we definitely at the start wanted to at least alleviate those issues, and we keep improving those tools. And then afterwards, hopefully when we get a little bit deeper into this conversation with more people, there are some other things we want to do as a platform as well to help kind of push forward thinking, new thinking into the equation. But that's just my kind of plug as well. But
that's a good one, right? So
well, thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate your time. Love the conversation. Thank you for being a user and a member of Brick+Work. And I just, for everyone else, look forward to our next episode. And thank you guys for joining us. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Thank you so much for having me. It was a real thrill for me.